Sunlight filtered through Murphy's grease-stained windows, casting shadows across Ryan's weathered hands as he watched Harper construct tiny castles from her French fries. The worn booth cushions sighed beneath them. Their Saturday ritual, this stolen hour before reality crashed back. The bell above the door shattered the peace with a desperate chime. Designer stilettos struck linoleum like gunshots. A woman materialized at their table. Her Hermes coat incongruous against the faded vinyl, manicured fingers white-knuckled around a clutch that cost more than Ryan's monthly rent. Her porcelain face carried the haunted beauty of expensive desperation. Two shadows filled the doorframe, tailored suits, predator eyes scanning the diner like wolves scenting prey. She leaned across the scratched formica, her breath warm against Ryan's ear, voice fracturing like crystal. "Pretend I'm your wife, please." Harper's crayon suspended in midair, a frozen rainbow bridge between innocence and whatever darkness had just invaded their sanctuary. What nightmare could transform silk and diamonds into raw, trembling terror? Ryan's pulse hammered against his collar as the woman's emerald eyes locked onto his. Desperation bled through her composed facade like watercolors in rain. Her diamond bracelet caught the fluorescent light as she reached across the table, fingers trembling toward Harper's coloring book. "What a beautiful drawing, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice steady now, practiced. Harper beamed, her 7-year-old heart instantly charmed by attention from someone who looked like a princess from her storybooks. The men in suits moved deeper into the diner, their footsteps deliberate as clockwork. Ryan felt their gaze sweep across his table like searchlights hunting for secrets. The woman's hand found his, her touch ice-cold despite the warmth that had brushed his ear moments before. "My name is Celeste," she murmured, her lips barely moving as she spoke. "Play along. Please." Her fingers tightened around his. As the larger man approached their booth, his shadow falling across Harper's artwork like storm clouds swallowing sunshine. Ryan's mind raced through possibilities, but Harper's safety anchored every decision. He squeezed Celeste's hand in wordless agreement. The man's smile never reached his eyes as he surveyed the peculiar family tableau before him. His expensive watch caught the diner's harsh lighting as he placed one manicured hand on their table. "Mom," he said, his voice smooth as silk, hiding razors underneath. "Your father is looking for you." Celeste's nails dug crescents into Ryan's palm, but her voice remained steady as granite. "I'm having lunch with my husband and stepdaughter," she replied, each word carved from stone and defiance. Harper looked up from her coloring, confusion flickering across her innocent features like candlelight in wind. The man's gaze shifted to Ryan, measuring and weighing the threat level of a tired single father in a second-hand shirt. His paws stretched like a taut wire ready to snap before he finally spoke again. "I see," he said, the words carrying undertones of doubt and calculation. "Enjoy your meal." He stepped backward with predatory grace, never taking his eyes off their table until he rejoined his companion near the entrance. Through the window, Ryan watched them retreat to a black sedan idling at the curb like a mechanical beast waiting to strike. The engine's low rumble penetrated even the diner's thick walls. Celeste's death grip on Ryan's hand finally loosened, leaving white impressions where her fingers had been. Her composure cracked like ice under spring sun, shoulders sagging as if invisible weights had been lifted from her frame. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the diner's ambient hum of conversation and clinking silverware. Harper set down her crayon with the deliberate precision she used for important moments, her young eyes studying this mysterious woman who had turned their quiet lunch into something from the movies she watched with Daddy. "Are you really going to marry my daddy?" she asked with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Celeste's laugh bubbled up like champagne, genuine for the first time since she had entered their lives. Her hand moved toward Harper's face before stopping mid-air, as if remembering boundaries she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross. "That's complicated, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice carrying notes of wonder and sadness. The waitress approached with coffee-stained apron and knowing eyes that had witnessed 3 decades of diner drama. She refilled Ryan's cup without being asked, her protective gaze flickering between the expensive stranger and the father-daughter duo she'd served countless Saturday lunches. "Everything all right here, honey?" she asked Ryan, but her maternal instincts were clearly aimed at Harper's well-being. Celeste fumbled in her purse, withdrawing a leather wallet that probably cost more than Ryan made in a week. The clasp clicked open with the soft sound of expensive hardware. "Let me pay for lunch," she offered, but Ryan's hand covered hers before she could extract the platinum credit card nestled inside. "We've got it," he said quietly, his pride intact despite everything that had just unfolded. The simple gesture seemed to surprise Celeste more than kindness from a stranger should, her eyes searching his face as if trying to decode a language she'd never learned. Her fingers traced the worn edges of his wallet when he pulled it out, curiosity replacing the fear that had dominated her features moments before. Harper slid out of the booth with the fluid grace of childhood, her small hand tugging on Celeste's designer sleeve, with fingers that left invisible marks on $1,000 fabric. "Do you want to see my room?" she asked with the fearless invitation that only children can extend to strangers. "I have books and a dollhouse Daddy made from cardboard boxes." Celeste's breath caught, her hand instinctively reaching toward Harper's face before stopping mid-air again. "I would love that," she whispered, and something in her voice made Ryan's chest tighten with emotions he couldn't name. The 3 of them walked 6 blocks to Ryan's apartment building, Harper chattering about school and friends, and the kitten she hoped to get someday. Celeste listened with the intensity of someone starved for ordinary conversation, her expensive heels clicking against cracked sidewalks like a metronome marking time between 2 worlds. She stumbled once on an uneven section of pavement, and Ryan's hand steadied her elbow with automatic gentleness. The contact sent electricity through both of them, unexpected and unsettling. Harper skipped ahead, oblivious to the adult complications swirling around her, pointing out important landmarks like the flower shop, where she and Daddy sometimes bought discount roses, and the corner store that sold her favorite bubble gum. Celeste absorbed every detail as if committing Harper's world to memory, her earlier terror gradually replaced by something that looked dangerously like longing. The apartment door stuck, as it always did, requiring Ryan's shoulder against warped wood before yielding with a reluctant groan. Harper bounced inside, her energy transforming the cramped space into something magical through pure enthusiasm and 7-year-old optimism. Celeste paused at the threshold, her eyes taking in second-hand furniture and walls decorated with Harper's artwork instead of expensive paintings. The coffee table bore rings from countless mugs, and the couch sagged in spots worn smooth by years of use and love. Yet something in the air, perhaps the scent of Harper's strawberry shampoo mixed with Ryan's familiar aftershave, perhaps the warmth that comes from genuine affection rather than central heating, made Celeste's carefully constructed facade crumble entirely. She sank onto the couch as if her legs could no longer support whatever weight she'd been carrying. "I haven't been in a real home in years," she admitted, her voice small and lost in the apartment's comfortable chaos. Harper emerged from her bedroom dragging a cardboard dollhouse that listed slightly to one side but had been painted with meticulous care in shades of pink and purple. "Daddy made this when Mommy went to heaven," she announced with the matter-of-fact acceptance children have for life's hardest truths. Celeste's hand flew to her throat, where a simple gold chain disappeared beneath her silk blouse, and Ryan caught a glimpse of something that might have been a locket. "Your mommy sounds like she was very special," Celeste managed, her voice thick with unshed tears that threatened to spill over. Ryan busied himself in the kitchen, the familiar ritual of making coffee giving his hands something to do, while his heart processed the stranger who had invaded their careful routine. The apartment felt different with Celeste in it, smaller somehow, yet also more complete, as if a missing piece had clicked into place without anyone realizing it was gone. Harper demonstrated each room of her dollhouse with the pride of an architect unveiling a masterpiece, her small fingers arranging tiny furniture with careful precision. Celeste sat cross-legged on the carpet, her expensive dress pooling around her like spilled wine, completely absorbed in Harper's guided tour of miniature domestic life. Ryan watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee growing cold in his hands as he witnessed something extraordinary, his daughter bringing joy to a woman who seemed to have forgotten what happiness looked like. The late afternoon light slanted through their windows, casting everything in golden warmth that made the moment feel suspended in amber. When Harper's bedtime arrived with the inevitability of sunset, she wrapped her small arms around Celeste's neck with the easy affection of a child who had decided someone belonged in her world. "Will you read me a story?" she asked, and Celeste's eyes met Ryan's over Harper's head, seeking permission for something neither of them fully understood. Ryan nodded, and they moved to Harper's bedroom, with its walls covered in crayon drawings and glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling in patterns that made sense only to a 7-year-old imagination. Celeste's voice carried perfectly through the thin walls as she read about princesses and dragons and happy endings, her tone growing steadier with each page turned. Ryan cleaned the kitchen and tried not to think about how right this felt, how complete their small family seemed with this unexpected addition. 3 days passed like pages in a book neither of them wanted to finish reading. Celeste slept on their couch, her designer clothes gradually replaced by borrowed t-shirts and jeans that transformed her from untouchable ice queen into someone beautifully, perfectly human. She walked Harper to Riverside Elementary each morning, her presence creating a bubble of normalcy that felt both foreign and essential to their routine. Ryan worked his shifts at Murphy's Diner, but his mind wandered constantly to the woman who was learning to make pancakes from scratch in his kitchen and laughing at Harper's terrible knock-knock jokes. Something was growing between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition of two broken people, discovering they might fit together better than either had dared to hope. The apartment filled with sounds it had never held before. Celeste's genuine laughter, the rustle of expensive fabric mixed with everyday cotton, conversations that lasted long after Harper fell asleep. The phone calls started on Wednesday morning like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. Ryan would catch Celeste staring at her silent cell phone with the expression of someone watching a ticking bomb. Her jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. She jumped at every unexpected sound: the mailman's footsteps in the hallway, the neighbor's door slamming shut, Harper's laughter echoing from the living room where she played with her toys. Her hands shook when she thought no one was looking, and she checked the locks on Ryan's door compulsively before bed each night. Whatever she was running from was getting closer, and they all felt the approaching storm in the way her smiles became more forced, her laughter more brittle and desperate. Harper seemed to sense it too, staying closer to Celeste throughout the day, as if her 7-year-old instincts understood that this magical addition to their family might disappear as suddenly as she had arrived. Sunday arrived grey and heavy with unspoken possibilities hanging in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Harper was at a sleepover with her friend Jessica, leaving Ryan and Celeste alone in an apartment that suddenly felt too small and too large simultaneously. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them charged with everything they hadn't said, every question they hadn't asked, every truth they hadn't shared. Celeste's hands twisted in her lap as she finally began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of years of suppressed truth. "My family owns Sterling Industries," she said, the words falling like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. "They arranged my marriage to consolidate power, merge companies, increase profits. I'm just a chess piece to them, an asset to be moved around the board according to their strategy." Ryan listened without judgment as she painted a picture of a life lived in golden cages, where every decision was made by committee, and love was a luxury she'd never been allowed to afford. Her phone buzzed against the coffee table like an angry insect, the screen lighting up with a contact name that made her entire body go rigid with fear. She stared at it as if it might explode, her breathing shallow and quick like a trapped animal's. Ryan reached over and turned the phone face down, the simple gesture speaking louder than any words of comfort or protection he could have offered. "They can't make you marry someone," he said quietly, but Celeste's bitter laugh cut through his naive optimism like a blade through silk, sharp and final and devastating. "They have my daughter," she whispered, and suddenly everything made sense. The desperation in the diner, the fear that followed her like a shadow, the way she'd looked at Harper as if seeing a ghost of someone beloved and lost. "Sophie is 6 years old, and they're holding her hostage to ensure my compliance with their plans." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre, heavy with the weight of impossible choices and love perverted into weapons of control. Ryan's coffee mug sat forgotten on the table as he processed the enormity of what Celeste had just revealed, his mind reeling with images of a little girl trapped in a world of adults who saw her only as leverage. A mother separated from her child, held captive by her own family's greed and endless hunger for power and influence. Ryan's world tilted on its axis as the full scope of Celeste's situation became clear in his mind. His hand found hers without conscious thought, their fingers interlacing like puzzle pieces that had finally discovered their perfect match after years of searching. "We'll figure this out," he said, and the certainty in his voice surprised them both, with its strength and conviction. Celeste's eyes searched his face for false hope or empty promises, but found only steady determination and something that looked dangerously like the beginning of love. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking on the single syllable like glass under pressure. "Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know?" Ryan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, each touch writing promises he wasn't entirely sure he could keep, but was determined to try. "Because Harper needs you," he said simply, the truth settling between them like a bridge. "And maybe we need you too." Monday morning shattered their fragile peace like a hammer through stained glass, all the colors scattering in different directions. Ryan was pouring coffee with hands that shook slightly when the doorbell rang, with the insistence of someone who expected immediate answers and had the authority to demand them. Through the peephole he saw a man in an expensive suit holding an official-looking briefcase, his patience worn thin by whatever urgent business had brought him to this modest apartment building at 8 in the morning. Celeste appeared beside Ryan like a ghost, her face drained of all color as she recognized the visitor through the small glass circle. "My family's lawyer," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the hammering of both their hearts. The man's knock came again, more demanding this time, echoing through the apartment like Judgment Day announcing itself. Ryan made a decision that would change everything, opening the door with the confident smile of a man who had nothing to hide and everything to protect. His arm slid around Celeste's waist with natural ease, claiming her as his own in front of this representative of her past life. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos raging in his chest like a wildfire. The lawyer's eyes swept over the domestic scene with clinical precision, cataloguing details like evidence in a case he was already building in his sharp legal mind. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice smooth as silk, hiding razor wire underneath its polished surface. "Your family is concerned about your absence from recent board meetings and social obligations. They've asked me to remind you of your responsibilities and commitments." His briefcase clicked open with the sound of closing traps, metal clasps echoing in the small space. From the briefcase he withdrew a folder thick with legal documents that rustled like autumn leaves carrying news of winter's inevitable approach. Celeste's hand tightened in Ryan's, her nails digging crescents into his palm as she fought to keep her voice steady and controlled. "I'm exactly where I choose to be," she said, each word carved from stone and defiance, polished smooth by years of suppressed rebellion. The lawyer's smile never reached his cold eyes as he placed the folder on Ryan's coffee table like a declaration of war, the papers spreading slightly as they settled. "Your grandmother's will has been located," he said quietly, his words dropping into the silence like pebbles into a deep well. "I think you'll find it quite illuminating regarding your true position in the family structure." And the folder lay between them like an unexploded bomb, its contents promising to change everything they thought they knew about Celeste's situation. The folder remained unopened for nearly an hour after the lawyer's departure, sitting on their coffee table like a coiled snake neither of them wanted to disturb. Celeste stared at it, as if it might burst into flames or reveal secrets too dangerous to know. Ryan made fresh coffee with hands that shook only slightly, the familiar routine providing an anchor in a storm that threatened to tear apart everything they'd built in their few precious days together. The apartment felt smaller with the weight of legal documents pressing down on them, changing the very air they breathed. When Ryan finally convinced Celeste to open the folder, his gentle encouragement giving her the courage she needed, the documents inside told a story that neither of them had expected to read. Celeste's grandmother, the family matriarch who had died when Celeste was only 16 years old, had apparently seen the writing on the wall decades before anyone else recognized the danger. The will, hidden for years by lawyers paid handsomely to keep family secrets buried, left controlling interest of Sterling Industries not to Celeste's ambitious father, but to Celeste herself, along with conditions that read like a love letter from beyond the grave. Ryan watched Celeste's face transform as she read her grandmother's words, years of resignation melting away to reveal the strong woman who had been buried beneath layers of family expectations and control. She knew, Celeste whispered, her voice thick with wonder and grief for the woman who had protected her even in death. Somehow she knew they would try to control me completely, and she built me an escape route that they couldn't close. The conditions were simple enough to understand, but complex enough to change everything about Celeste's future and the power structure that had controlled her entire life. She would inherit full control of the family empire with all its wealth and influence, but only if she could prove she was living her own life and making her own choices, completely free from family manipulation and coercion. The will specifically mentioned marriage for love rather than business convenience, raising any children in an environment of genuine affection rather than calculated advantage for the family name. Ryan's coffee grew cold in his hands as he watched Celeste process the magnitude of what her grandmother had done, tears streaming down her face like rain washing away years of accumulated pain and hopelessness. The documents proved that not only was Celeste free to make her own choices, but that any attempt by her family to coerce or threaten her would result in the complete dissolution of their carefully constructed power structure. Harper burst through the apartment door like a small hurricane returning from her sleepover adventure, her overnight bag abandoned in the hallway as she launched herself at Celeste with the enthusiasm of someone who had missed a beloved friend more than words could express. "Did you miss me?" she demanded, her arms wrapping around Celeste's neck with the easy affection that had developed between them over their short time together. Celeste buried her face in Harper's hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and innocent joy as if it could wash away years of pain and manipulation that had defined her existence. "More than you could possibly know," she whispered, and Ryan saw something shift in her expression. A transformation from hunted animal to protective mother, from victim of circumstances to victor over her own destiny. When Harper spotted the legal documents scattered across the coffee table, she plopped down beside them with the natural curiosity of someone too young to understand their earth-shaking significance. "Are these important papers?" Harper asked, her finger tracing the elegant letterhead with its embossed gold seal, and Celeste's laugh bubbled up like champagne celebrating a long-awaited victory. "The most important papers in the world, sweetheart," she said, gathering Harper closer as if the child were an anchor, keeping her grounded in this new reality. Ryan found himself smiling despite the magnitude of changes these documents represented, watching two of the most important people in his expanding world discover new possibilities together. The afternoon light shifted through their windows, casting the legal papers in golden hues that made them seem less threatening and more like promises of freedom waiting to be claimed. Harper's innocent acceptance of whatever came next reminded them all that the most important changes often happened not in boardrooms or lawyers' offices, but in living rooms where families were built from choice rather than obligation. The phone call came that evening, just as they were settling down to dinner at Ryan's small kitchen table, the domestic normalcy of shared meals and easy conversation representing everything Celeste had been denied in her previous life. Celeste's phone buzzed against the Formica surface like an angry wasp, and this time she answered it with steady hands and steel in her voice that Ryan had never heard before. He could hear only her side of the conversation, but her responses painted a clear picture of someone taking control of her own destiny for the first time in her adult life. "Yes, I've read Grandmother's will," she said calmly, twirling pasta around her fork as if discussing the weather rather than the future of a corporate empire. "Yes, I understand exactly what this means for the company and for all of you." Her father's voice rose to levels audible, even across the table, his rage crackling through the phone speaker like static electricity before a lightning strike. Celeste's expression never changed as she delivered the words that would reshape her family's future and probably echo through Sterling Industries boardrooms for years to come. "Sophie will be returned to me within 24 hours, she said with the calm authority of someone who finally held all the cards in a game she'd been forced to play since childhood. "Or I'll exercise my right to dissolve Sterling Industries entirely, scattering the pieces to whatever competitors want to pick them up." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath before the line went dead, leaving them in a kitchen suddenly filled with the sound of their own heartbeats and the quiet satisfaction of justice finally being served. Harper looked up from her spaghetti with wide eyes, not understanding the corporate implications, but sensing that something monumentally important had just happened at their dinner table. 2 weeks later, Ryan stood in the doorway of their new apartment, not the cramped space above Murphy's diner where they'd first become a family, but a real home with enough bedrooms for everyone and windows that let in actual sunlight instead of the harsh glow of neon signs. Harper and Sophie played in the living room with their matching doll houses, their laughter creating a soundtrack of pure joy that filled every corner with warmth and life. The girls had bonded instantly when Sophie finally arrived, as if they were sisters separated at birth rather than strangers brought together by extraordinary circumstances and the determination of adults who refused to let family politics destroy innocent lives. Celeste emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron dusted with flour, her hands still learning the art of cooking without professional help, but her smile lighting her face with the kind of happiness that comes from choosing your own path rather than following someone else's map. She'd bought Ryan out of his diner contract and helped him enroll in the business program at the local college, but more importantly, she'd learned to make pancakes from scratch and could now braid 2 little girls' hair without consulting YouTube tutorials every morning. The job offer had come from Sterling Industries itself, not as charity or family obligation, but as recognition of Ryan's natural leadership abilities and the business degree he'd never had the chance to complete when life and single parenthood had taken priority over personal ambitions. He would start as a regional manager, learning the company from the ground up, while Celeste took her rightful place at the helm of an empire that would now be run according to principles of fairness rather than pure profit. Their relationship had evolved slowly and carefully, built on foundations of mutual respect and genuine affection rather than desperation or convenience, each day bringing new discoveries about compatibility and shared dreams. They were learning to be a family not because circumstances had forced them together in crisis, but because they chose each other every single day with deliberate intention and growing love. When Harper asked with her characteristic directness if Celeste was going to be her new mummy, Ryan's heart stopped for a moment before Celeste answered with the honesty that had become her trademark since escaping her family's web of deception. "I'd like to be," she said simply, her voice carrying hope and uncertainty in equal measure. "If that's what you want too." Harper's enthusiastic yes, and Sophie's clapping hands settled the question with the easy acceptance that children bring to life's most important decisions, their joy infectious enough to fill the apartment with laughter that echoed off the walls and settled into the furniture like a blessing. The adoption papers sat on the coffee table next to Harper's newest artwork, a family portrait featuring 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun, their smiles drawn with careful attention to making sure everyone looked happy. Sophie's legal guardianship had been transferred to Celeste without contest once her father realized that fighting would mean losing everything he'd spent his life building, his corporate empire crumbling if he pushed his daughter too far. The Sterling family business continued under new management, but with values that prioritized people over profits and love over leverage, transforming not just the company culture, but the entire industry's approach to family-owned corporations. Ryan often marveled at the series of coincidences that had brought them together. A desperate woman seeking sanctuary, a lonely father providing shelter, a little girl who saw family where others saw strangers, and a grandmother's love reaching across death to protect her granddaughter's future. But perhaps coincidence was the wrong word for something that felt so much like destiny, as if the universe had been carefully arranging pieces on a cosmic chessboard, waiting for the right moment to reveal a pattern that would change all their lives forever. Saturday mornings found them back at Murphy's diner, not because they had to be there anymore, but because some traditions were worth keeping, even when circumstances changed dramatically. They sat in the same booth where it all began, Harper and Sophie coloring with brand new crayons, while Ryan and Celeste shared coffee and comfortable silence that spoke of deep understanding and complete acceptance. The waitress who had served them that first chaotic day always smiled a little wider when she saw them together, as if she took personal credit for the happiness that radiated from their table and infected other customers with its warmth. Other diners occasionally glanced their way, perhaps sensing the kind of love story that usually only existed in movies but had somehow manifested in real life right there in a small neighborhood restaurant. The question came on a Tuesday evening as they tucked the girls into their shared bedroom, the domesticity of bedtime routines now as natural as breathing after months of learning each other's rhythms and preferences. Harper looked up from her pillow with the serious expression she wore when asking questions that she considered monumentally important to the future of their family. "Daddy," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 7-year-old deliberation. "Are we going to get a kitten now that we have a bigger house and Sophie to help take care of it?" Ryan and Celeste exchanged glances over the girls' heads, their silent communication as natural as breathing after months of learning to read each other's thoughts and emotions. They'd talked about pets during their late-night conversations, about expanding their family in small ways that would bring even more joy to their already overflowing home, and give the girls additional responsibility and companionship. "Maybe," Ryan said carefully, knowing that Harper would interpret any positive response as a definite commitment, and her squeal of delight was answer enough to confirm his suspicions about her expectations. Sophie clapped her hands together with infectious enthusiasm, her 6-year-old energy barely contained by the approaching bedtime that would temporarily pause their celebration. "Can we name her Princess?" she asked with the confidence of someone who had already planned out every detail of pet ownership. And suddenly they were all laughing with the kind of spontaneous joy that comes from hearts too full of happiness to contain it all. The laughter echoed through their new home, filling spaces that had been empty for too long and creating the kind of memories that would anchor this family through whatever challenges the future might bring. The animal shelter visit happened the following weekend, all four of them piling into Celeste's SUV, with the excitement of people embarking on a great adventure that would expand their family in the most delightful way possible. They'd agreed on one kitten initially, maybe two if they found siblings who couldn't be separated, but the shelter was full of possibilities that challenged their careful planning. Harper fell in love with an orange tabby who purred like a tiny motor, while Sophie was enchanted by a black kitten with white paws who seemed to choose her as much as she chose him. Ryan watched his daughter negotiate with the wisdom of someone far older than her 7 years, explaining to Sophie with patient logic that maybe they needed both cats because families take care of each other, and these kitties need a family too. Celeste's eyes met his across the adoption room filled with hopeful animals and excited children, and he saw his own thoughts reflected in her gaze. How had they gotten so lucky to find each other in that moment of crisis that had seemed like the end of the world for all of them? How had a moment of desperation in a diner transformed into this abundance of love and laughter and possibility that seemed to expand every day? The shelter volunteer helped them complete the paperwork, while Harper and Sophie debated names with the seriousness of parents naming newborn children, their voices rising and falling in animated discussion. Ryan signed documents that officially made them a pet-owning family, another milestone in their transformation from strangers to something deeper and more permanent than any legal definition could capture. Celeste handled the adoption fees with the easy generosity of someone who had learned the difference between spending money on things that mattered and the hollow purchases that had filled her previous life with beautiful objects but no real meaning. The drive home was chaos in the best possible way, 2 kittens in carriers competing with 2 excited girls for who could make the most noise in celebration of their expanded family. Celeste navigated traffic with one hand while reaching back to comfort whichever child needed attention at any given moment, her multitasking skills having developed rapidly through weeks of intensive motherhood training. Ryan marveled at how naturally she'd adapted to motherhood times 2, how seamlessly she'd slipped into the rhythm of family life that he'd been managing alone for so long it had become automatic. When they pulled into their driveway, neighbors peeked out of windows to see what all the commotion was about, smiling at the sight of pure, uncomplicated joy spilling out of the vehicle like sunshine made audible. "Home," Harper announced, as they unloaded carriers and children and enough pet supplies to stock a small store, her voice carrying satisfaction and belonging. "We're all home now." That night, after the kittens were settled in their new environment, and the girls were finally asleep despite their excitement, and the house had quieted to gentle purring and soft breathing that spoke of contentment and security, Ryan and Celeste sat on their back porch sharing a bottle of wine and comfortable silence. The legal battles were over, the family was complete, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys in equal measure. But tonight was perfect in its simplicity and peace. Celeste leaned against Ryan's shoulder, her head fitting perfectly in the space between his neck and collarbone, as if she'd been designed specifically for that purpose by whatever force had brought them together. "Do you ever think about that day in the diner?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying wonder at how much their lives had changed from that moment of crisis and terror. "Every day," Ryan admitted, his arm tightening around her as he drew her closer and considered all the ways their lives had intertwined since that desperate morning when fear had driven her to seek sanctuary with strangers. "But not because I want to change anything about how it happened. The stars wheeled overhead in patterns ancient and eternal, bearing witness to yet another love story that had defied odds and exceeded expectations, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the most ordinary moments. Somewhere in the house, Harper was probably explaining to the kittens why they needed to sleep in proper beds instead of exploring their new territory all night, while Sophie dreamed of adventures yet to come with her new sister and pets and family that had materialized like magic from what had seemed like impossible circumstances just months before. Family, they had learned through trial and transformation, isn't always about where you come from or what name you were born with. Sometimes it's about who chooses to stay when things get difficult, who chooses to love when it would be easier to walk away, who chooses to build something beautiful together from whatever broken pieces they've brought to the table of shared experience. And in the end, that choice makes all the difference between existing and truly living, between surviving and thriving, between being alone and being home.